It was September the 3rd, 1943. News was coming through of the Allied invasion of the Italian mainland, as the 14-year-old Cedric, the only son of an Anglican priest, alighted from the removal van which had arrived at Everton Rectory after a long journey from North Yorkshire. The nights were beginning to draw in, and as the process of unloading began, Cedric was sent across the road to collect a kettle of boiling water with which they might make tea. It was in the house of the church warden that Cedric and Grace first met, two awkward and lonely teenagers who were too shy to let the other know that they felt attracted. Thus it was not until a few years later, when Cedric had been called up for national service and then began training at Sandhurst for a commission in the Royal Artillery, that he plucked up courage to ask Grace out. In September 1950, on the eve of his posting to Korea, they married. It seems that I was the direct product of their honeymoon, being born on the 10th of June, 1951. Grace now lived at Everton Rectory, and my grandfather, Henry, gladly took on the role of father, referring to me as Grandpa's little man. He doted on me, and a certain level of competition developed between him and my maternal grandfather Charlie, who owned the village shop. When Henry bought a wooden ark with wheels for me, Charlie went one better by purchasing from one of the auction sales he frequented a larger and heavier ark that floated. Once I was on my feet, both grandfathers took me for walks, and each gave me a special walking stick. Such was the envy that Henry once noticed that I was out with Charlie's stick, which had a silver bulldog's head for its handle, and threw it across the fields. Although we searched for ages, it was never found. Both told me of their exploits in the First World War. Charlie, one of the few survivors of his Northamptonshire regiment, was taken prisoner at the Somme and suffered the effects of mustard gas poisoning for the rest of his life. Henry, whose role was to repair the communication lines between the front and the Royal Artillery, was awarded the Military Cross and the Croix de Guerre. In those first 18 months, I was certainly the centre of attention and clearly influenced by my doting paternal grandfather. Grace certainly was controlled, and there was even a battle over whether I should be called Christopher or Henry. My mother got her way, but only after Henry had registered my birth as Henry Christopher Whiteman. However, her horizons were widening as an officer's wife and as the daughter-in-law of the rector. We were invited to Little Everton, the neighbouring village, to the hall for tea. This was quite a culture shock and novelty, especially in those days when even farmers and farm labourers still inhabited separate pubs. I have very good memories of my grandparents, who were all with me through my childhood. Grandma Lillian Whiteman always welcomed me and was homely. I remember one of the prayers that she taught me. Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, bless the bed that I lie on. 4 corners to my bed, 4 angels there be spread. 1 at the head, 1 at the feet, and 2 to guard me while I sleep. Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, bless the bed that I lie on. Grandma Lillian taught me about God and the saints, such as Christopher, whose picture hung in my room at Marston Trussell Rectory. Grandma Nancy Bradley was generous, and on visits to her shop she would ply me with lemonade, fruit pies and sweets. She worked long hours, getting up at 6 a.m. to make a cooked breakfast for everyone, and then to serve in the shop until 8 p.m. After 2 years in the Far East, Cedric returned home. His experience, like that of all soldiers who have been on active service, had changed him forever. He needed space, and it would take time for him to get used to his new family. Things at Everton were too stifling, but soon there was a posting to Germany, and he could begin to find Grace again as his wife, and discover the 15-month-old Christopher as his son. Following 2 short postings in the UK, the Royal Artillery posted Dad to Germany. I remember being frightened by a man dressed as a polar bear when we went on a ski lift at the Hartsberg Resort, and my parents had to ask him to remove his head so that we could continue. On a holiday at Winterberg, I knocked over a fire extinguisher which Dad had to struggle with in order to pick it up as it spun round, gushing out water. And then on Christmas Eve we saw through the large hotel windows Santa Claus arriving on a sleigh. That was something else. I remember a longing to go with the older children to school. I recall the time when a girlfriend and I decided to take a bath together in the bathroom sink, which we had first carefully filled to the brim with water. The first my mother knew of this was when she felt drips of water on her head coming through the kitchen ceiling. My new playmate, Elizabeth, was born on the 16th of May, 1954. The next stop for us was Salisbury. There I remember sitting with Mum and Elizabeth on the lawn surrounding the cathedral, singing to the ladybirds, "Ladybird, ladybird, fly away home," and seeing if they would. In Salisbury I started at Miss Ison's nursery school, but all I can remember is watching a royal wedding on television on a warm summer afternoon. At home, I remember the Weetabix packets and cardboard models of railway engines that we cut out from the back. I remember the excitement I felt when I was invited to a birthday party with some older children. On arriving, I joined the boys in a game of cowboys and Indians and thought to myself, this is great. However, within a short time, the lady of the house came in saying something about there being more boys than girls, and that I was the youngest there. My heart sank as she then took me by the hand and dragged me into the room where the girls were, to play the farmer in The Farmer's in His Dell. Mum's memory from this time. When we were living in Salisbury Plain, Cedric learned to fly a plane. If I knew he was flying on a particular day, I would go outside with a tablecloth and wave it as high as I could. Cedric always looked for this tablecloth bellowing in the wind below. They were very happy days. While Dad was learning how to fly chipmunks at Middle Wallop, he met Pat Rooney, who asked him if by chance he knew someone called Henry Whiteman. Pat had met Henry in 1940 when they were in France facing the German advance. Pat, who was an accomplished artist, drew this sketch of Henry. Now, in 1956, Pat offered to also draw a cartoon of Cedric and produced two, which can be seen on the next page.